Imagine being alone in your own home, where every sound feels louder, every shadow seems deeper, and then it begins. Soft knocks echo through the silence, growing louder, closer, pulling you into a nightmare you can't escape. What if the walls you trust to protect you hide something far more sinister? What I'm about to share isn't just a story, it's a warning. Because once you hear the knocks, there's no turning back. It started on a Friday night, quiet and uneventful. My wife was working late and I was alone in the house. I settled into my usual routine, TV on for background noise, scrolling through my phone. The house was unusually still, almost too quiet, but I chalked it up to being tired. Around 11 p.m., I heard a sound. At first, it was so faint, I wasn't even sure I'd heard it, a light, rhythmic tapping. It wasn't from the front door or the windows, but from somewhere deeper inside the house. I muted the TV, straining to listen. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was deliberate, like someone knocking softly on a door. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. My first thought was that it had to be my wife, but when I checked my phone, there were no messages. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response. The tapping continued, now coming from upstairs. My heart sank. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling or maybe the old plumbing. But something about it felt wrong. Grabbing a flashlight, I made my way to the staircase. The air felt colder as I ascended, and the tapping grew louder. It was coming from the spare bedroom at the end of the hall. I stood outside the door, my hand hovering over the knob. "Who's in there?" I called, trying to sound braver than I felt. The tapping stopped. I opened the door, the hinges creaking in protest. The room was empty, just as I had left it except for the closet door, which was slightly ajar. A wave of dread washed over me. I didn't remember leaving it open. Summoning all my courage, I stepped inside and approached the closet. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. With one quick motion, I yanked it open. Nothing. Just an empty closet filled with old boxes and forgotten belongings. I laughed nervously, feeling ridiculous. "You're losing it," I muttered to myself. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something odd. In the mirror above the dresser, my reflection wasn't quite right. It was me, but it wasn't moving the way I was. It stood still, staring back at me, its head tilted slightly. I blinked, and the reflection smiled. The lights flickered, and when they steadied, the reflection was gone. My knees buckled, and I stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I rushed downstairs, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light or my imagination playing games, but deep down I knew better. I decided to wait in the living room with every light on, refusing to go back upstairs. But as I sat there, trying to calm myself, the tapping started again. This time it was coming from the basement. "Not again," I whispered, my voice shaky. I wanted to ignore it, to lock the basement door and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the sound grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't going to let me ignore it. I grabbed the flashlight again and opened the basement door. The stairs stretched down into darkness, and the air smelled damp and stale. "Who's down there?" I shouted, trying to mask my fear. No answer. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, each step creaking beneath my weight. The tapping continued, echoing through the cold, empty space. At the bottom of the stairs, I swept the flashlight beam across the basement. Everything seemed normal: old furniture, boxes, tools, but the sound persisted. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the far corner, where an old storage cabinet stood. I approached cautiously, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The cabinet door was slightly open, just enough for me to see darkness inside. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled the door open. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, from the shadows of the cabinet, two glowing eyes stared back at me. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The light spun wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A figure emerged from the cabinet, its shape indistinct but undeniably human like. "Why did you call me?" it whispered, its voice low and guttural. "I didn't," I stammered, backing away. It tilted its head, studying me. "You heard the knocks, you opened the door, you called me." The room grew colder, and the figure stepped closer. Its form shifted, flickering between shadow and substance. "Leave me alone," I shouted, scrambling up the stairs. The figure didn't follow, but its voice echoed behind me. "You can't escape. I'm already here." I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, my hands shaking. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every sound. The knocks didn't return, but the feeling of being watched never left. When morning finally came, I packed a bag and left the house, refusing to stay another night. I never went back. To this day, I don't know what I let into my home that night, but sometimes when I'm alone, I still hear the tapping soft, insistent, as if reminding me it's still out there, waiting. I never considered myself the type to believe in the supernatural. Strange bumps in the night, creaky floors, those were all things easily explained by science or at worst a restless imagination. But everything changed on the night I discovered that some things defy explanation. It started in the middle of an unseasonably cold November night. My wife had taken our kids to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house. I hadn't planned to do much, maybe catch up on work or binge watch a show I'd been neglecting. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than it should. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard it for the first time, a knock, faint but deliberate. I paused, my eyes darting toward the living room window. It sounded like someone had tapped on the glass, but when I pulled back the curtain, the yard was empty, the street beyond still and deserted. I laughed it off, convincing myself it was a branch in the wind, and settled back into the couch. Not 5 minutes later, the knocking came again, louder this time. It wasn't the window. It seemed to come from inside the house. I froze, every hair on my body standing on end. The sound repeated, knock, knock, knock. It was coming from upstairs. I told myself it was nothing, just the house settling or some trick of acoustics, but my heart didn't believe my logic. My pulse quickened as I stood at the foot of the staircase, staring up into the darkness. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. Response. Gripping the handrail, I slowly ascended, each step creaking beneath my weight. The air grew colder as I reached the top, and the hallway stretched before me, shadows pooling in the corners. The knocking had stopped, but I could feel something like I was being watched. The sound had come from my bedroom. The door was ajar, just enough to cast a sliver of light onto the carpet. I pushed it open and froze. The room was empty, but the closet door was slightly open. I stared at it, my breath shallow. I couldn't remember leaving it that way. Swallowing my fear, I reached out and yanked it open. Nothing. Just clothes hanging limply on their hangers, swaying slightly as if disturbed by a breeze. The air felt heavy, and I had the unsettling feeling that something had been there moments before. I shut the closet door firmly and hurried back downstairs, turning on every light as I went. I tried to shake off the unease, chalking it up to being alone in an old house, but deep down I knew something was off. And then it started again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was coming from the basement. My stomach churned as I approached the basement door. It was closed as I'd left it earlier, but the sound was unmistakable, three deliberate knocks, as if someone or something was down there waiting. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and opened the door. The basement stairs descended into pitch blackness, the air damp and musty. Is someone there? I called, my voice shaky. No answer. The knocks came again, louder this time, almost impatient. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I descended the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and my breath puffed out invisible clouds. At the bottom of the stairs, I swung the light around, illuminating the cluttered space. Boxes, tools, and an old workbench cast long, ominous shadows. Nothing seemed out of place, but the oppressive feeling of being watched grew stronger. And then I saw it. In the far corner, where the light barely reached, something moved. It was subtle, a faint shift in the shadows, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. Who's there? I demanded, my voice cracking. The shadow didn't respond, but it began to take shape, vaguely human, yet wrong. Its limbs were too long, its posture hunched, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, like someone speaking in a language I couldn't understand. When the light stabilized, the shadow was gone. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it, as if that could keep whatever I'd seen down there. The rest of the night was a blur of paranoia. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind, felt like a threat. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of knocking again. This time, it was coming from right behind me. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. The living room window was wide open, curtains fluttering in the icy breeze. On the floor, leading away from the window, were wet footprints too large to be human and shaped like nothing I'd ever seen. The footprints led to the basement door. I knew I should leave, but something compelled me to stay, as if the house itself wouldn't let me go. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the front door, but when I tried to open it, the knob wouldn't budge. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the house, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned to see the shadow standing at the top of the basement stairs, its head cocked unnaturally, its eyes, if they were eyes, glowing faintly in the dark. Leave it, whispered, its voice like the wind through dead trees. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran to the back door, wrenching it open with all my strength, and didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block. I never went back to that house. I moved my family far away, hoping to leave whatever I'd awakened behind. But sometimes late at night, I hear the knocks again, faint, distant, as if calling me back. And I know it's still waiting,